Hey guys! Tonight we're diving into a story that casts a long shadow from the past. It's about how women's emotions, their fears, and their overall mental well-being were so often misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and, frankly, even punished. We're going to journey from ancient medicine all the way to those Victorian asylums, exploring everything from so-called hysteria to some truly dangerous remedies. Get ready to walk through centuries of treatments, some bizarre, some just plain heartbreaking, that were once considered perfectly normal. So, before you settle in, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up and subscribe, but only if you're really enjoying what I'm doing here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. Now, let's dim the lights a bit. Maybe put on a fan for that nice, soft background hum. And let's gently ease into tonight's exploration together. We'll start our trip way back in ancient Greece, the land of philosophers, those captivating myths, and some really peculiar medical theories. Imagine this: you're a woman living around 400 B.C.E., and for weeks you just haven't been feeling yourself. You have this tightness in your chest, your heart races for absolutely no reason, and you're hit by these overwhelming waves of panic. You try to explain all of this to the local healer, and after some very dramatic chin-stroking, he proudly announces that you have a wandering womb. Yes, you heard correctly. The esteemed Hippocrates, the very guy who gave us the Hippocratic Oath, actually believed that women's wombs had minds of their own. According to his thinking, if a woman became too emotional, too anxious, or even stayed celibate for too long, her uterus might just pack up and start wandering around the body like a lost tourist. Up to the chest, down to the legs, wherever it fancied, really. Still, for many women, finally having a name for what they felt was like being handed a mirror after years in the dark. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't personal failure. It was real, and it had been there all along. Medications improved, too. SSRIs, drugs like Prozac and Zoloft became household names, marketed as modern solutions to modern struggles, and for many they truly helped. But again, they often came without a full explanation. No one was digging deeper into trauma, history, generational patterns. Just take this, feel better. So yes, progress was made, but it was clinical, not compassionate, structured, not sensitive. The labels were new, but the loneliness still painfully familiar. Because even with names and pills and pamphlets, the question still lingered in the quiet. Will someone ever ask why I'm afraid? Welcome to the 2000s. Where flip phones were cool, low-rise jeans were confusing, and for the first time in centuries, people started asking not just what's wrong with you, but what happened to you? It was a quiet revolution, not one with banners or protests, but with TED Talks, memoirs, and slowly shifting clinical conversations. Researchers, therapists, and trauma survivors began connecting dots that had long been ignored. Anxiety wasn't just a chemical imbalance or a random quirk. Sometimes it was a normal response to a life that hadn't been very kind. And suddenly, 3 words entered the spotlight: trauma-informed care. Instead of treating anxiety like an individual defect, this approach asked bigger questions. What experiences shaped your nervous system? What patterns is your body trying to survive? What if your hypervigilance isn't irrational, but learned? Let's begin with the Celts and the Picts, tribal peoples who inhabited what is now Britain and Scotland. When Roman soldiers first encountered them, they were utterly astonished. These warriors, some naked, some cloaked in wolf pelts, were covered in swirling blue tattoos, fierce spirals and intricate knots etched across their faces and bodies. The dye was derived from woad, a plant-based ink that stained the skin a deep blue, reminiscent of thunderclouds rolling across flesh. These weren't mere decorations. They were battle armor, intimidation tactics, and expressions of identity. To tattoo your body was to boldly declare, "I am not afraid to bleed." Julius Caesar described them in his writings, with a mix of awe and horror, labeling them as wild and barbaric, which is ironic, considering Rome's subsequent actions. Because while the Romans prided themselves on their law and order, they also utilized tattoos, not as symbols of honor, but as tools of control. Criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war were tattooed with marks of ownership or shame. A runaway slave might be branded with the letters FVG, an abbreviation for fugitivus. A soldier who deserted his legion was inked forever with a symbol of disgrace. Even Roman Christians, in the empire's early days, were sometimes tattooed to identify them as enemies of the state, or worse, heretics. These weren't badges of honor. They were burdens to bear. And yet, not all Roman tattooing was punitive in nature. Some soldiers, particularly those stationed in the eastern provinces, began to voluntarily tattoo themselves with symbols of loyalty to their legion or devotion to a particular deity, a quiet act of rebellion inked beneath their armor. Over time, as Christianity spread and solidified its power, tattooing across Europe fell further into disrepute. By the early Middle Ages, it was largely condemned as pagan, sinful, and barbaric. The narrative of the space race didn't commence with a spaceship or some wide-eyed ambition. Its origins were rooted in the aftermath of war. World War II had left the planet devastated. Cities were reduced to rubble, borders were redefined, and two major superpowers stood on opposite sides of a newly formed world order. The United States and the Soviet Union, once uneasy allies, found themselves as ideological adversaries. It was capitalism against communism, democracy against dictatorship. And in the remnants of Nazi Germany, both sides discovered something, or rather someone, they coveted. Wernher von Braun, the German engineer who had designed the lethal V-2 rocket, was captured by American forces and secretly transported to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip. The Soviets, determined not to be outdone, seized German scientists and research of their own. The spoils of war now included rocket fuel, blueprints, and the mines necessary to make them operational. The Cold War had begun, not with the sound of gunfire, but with an atmosphere of silence and deep-seated suspicion. Both sides engaged in a competition to develop not just bombs, but also the systems to deliver them. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, became the modern symbol of power, rockets capable of carrying nuclear warheads across vast distances, from one continent to another. However, before long, someone posed a different question. What if we aimed these rockets toward the stars instead? Space then became the next frontier, not for the purpose of exploration, but for the pursuit of dominance. It wasn't solely about scientific advancement. It was also about symbolism. The nation that reached space first would assert moral superiority, technological supremacy, and command global admiration. For the Soviets, this challenge carried a personal weight. The end of the Cold War had shifted the focus away from rivalry, but space exploration remained as captivating as ever. In the 1990s, the International Space Station, ISS, began to take shape in low Earth orbit. Launched in 1998, the ISS represented a groundbreaking collaboration between the United States, Russia, Canada, Japan, and Europe. The station became a symbol of what the world could achieve together, transcending the nationalistic ambitions of the past and placing scientific research above competition. It became humanity's largest and most complex space laboratory, orbiting Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour with astronauts from different nations living and working in space for extended periods. While the ISS continues to serve as a hub for international cooperation, scientific research, and technological innovation, it also laid the groundwork for a new direction in space exploration, the privatization of space. Enter SpaceX, founded by entrepreneur Elon Musk in 2002. Musk's vision was clear: to reduce the cost of space travel and make it possible for humans to live on other planets, particularly Mars. SpaceX's success in developing reusable rockets revolutionized space travel. In 2012, SpaceX's Dragon capsule became the first privately built spacecraft to deliver cargo to the ISS. In 2020, SpaceX achieved another milestone when its Crew Dragon spacecraft carried astronauts to the ISS, marking the first time since the Space Shuttle's retirement that American astronauts were launched into space from U.S. soil. SpaceX wasn't the only private player. Companies like Blue Origin, founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and Virgin Galactic, founded by Sir Richard Branson, have also made significant strides in commercial space travel, focusing on suborbital flights for tourists and research. These companies aren't just changing the business of space. They're redefining what's possible for private citizens to experience in space. seemed to push the boundaries of what humans could create. The stories say it wasn't just a bunch of rooms and hallways, but a huge, sprawling complex. The sheer size and how complicated it was showed how skilled the ancient Egyptians were at building and designing. Herodotus, who's famous for writing about history, said the labyrinth had 12 courtyards. Each one was separated by giant stone walls, like a series of fortresses protecting the inside. These walls were covered in detailed carvings that showed gods, kings, and creatures from Egyptian myths. Some of these carvings were so realistic, it was like looking at something alive, a mix of art and building that took your breath away. What really set the labyrinth apart was how massive it was. Herodotus said it had a giant web of rooms that connected to each other. Some of these rooms were so big you could fit whole villages inside. He thought it was as impressive as the pyramids. But unlike the pyramids, which were focused on one thing, the labyrinth seemed to hold endless secrets. Every turn and every hallway led to another mystery. Herodotus also talked about the incredible number of statues inside. These weren't just ordinary statues. They were amazing works of art. Some were made to look like the Egyptian gods, while others showed the pharaohs made immortal in stone. One description that really stood out was a huge statue of the god Osiris. It towered over the main room of the labyrinth, constantly reminding everyone of the god's presence throughout the whole place. Maybe the most interesting thing Herodotus wrote about was how the labyrinth was laid out. The rooms and hallways weren't just thrown together randomly. They were designed to confuse people, to make them feel like they were in a true maze. Herodotus said you couldn't see the whole thing in just one visit. It was too big and too complicated. And the symptoms that came with it, dizziness, breathlessness, trembling, were all supposedly because this nomadic organ was wreaking havoc. Now, the treatment? It wasn't exactly what you'd hope for. No cozy blanket or soothing herbal tea. Instead, doctors would waft pleasant-smelling herbs near the pelvis and absolutely foul-smelling ones near the nose, all in an effort to lure the womb back to its rightful place. Just picture lying there while someone waves burning garlic under your face, like they're trying to hold a seance for your uterus. All very scientific, of course. And in a society where women couldn't vote, couldn't own land, and couldn't even wear pants, this bizarre diagnosis was the only explanation people had for female distress. Anxiety wasn't seen as a mental or emotional experience. It was boiled down to rogue reproductive behavior. To be fair, the Greeks were working with what they had. No brain scans, no serotonin theory, no trauma-informed care. But still, blaming everything on a misbehaving uterus? That's like your car breaking down, and the mechanic saying, "Ah, yes, the cup holder is wandering again." The truth is, women in ancient times felt things deeply: grief, fear, stress, uncertainty. But instead of being asked how they felt, they were handed incense and told their womb was misaligned. And so the silence began, not just of misunderstood symptoms but of unheard stories. Let's drift now into ancient Rome, a civilization where things were generally advancing, plumbing was surprisingly impressive, and compassion was, well, still under construction. If you were a Roman woman struggling with anxiety, there was no therapist to call, no hotline to reach out to, and definitely no relaxing bath bomb to toss into the aqueduct. This wasn't just academic. It was deeply personal, especially for women, because now anxiety could be traced back to things no one wanted to talk about. Abuse, neglect, generational pressure, workplace harassment, the emotional weight of performing perfection while quietly breaking inside. For many, this brought relief, even validation. For the first time, their fear wasn't a flaw. It was a wound, and wounds can heal. But this wasn't a magical fix. Society still loved productivity more than peace. Women still faced pressure to be calm, capable, and composed, even while managing households, careers, children, and the growing stack of mental health buzzwords. Burnout, imposter syndrome, high-functioning anxiety, all terms that sounded new but often felt old. And while therapy was more accessible, it was still expensive, still inconsistent, still uneven. One therapist might. Here's the rewritten version of the text, translated and expanded upon in a natural American English style, maintaining the original meaning and length, and adhering to the specified formatting. Some might just awkwardly smile and offer unsolicited advice. Social media, while a mixed bag, both aided and hindered the process. Women suddenly had a platform to broadcast their struggles, fostering a sense of camaraderie across different time zones. Yet, this also meant being bombarded with simplistic solutions like drink more water or try meditating, completely sidestepping years of ingrained, systemic trauma. Despite these setbacks, a real shift was occurring. The world was beginning to catch up to what women had always instinctively known. Anxiety wasn't a personal failing or a sign of weakness. It was the echo of history reverberating through the body, a persistent whisper begging to be acknowledged. Now we find ourselves in the age of ubiquitous Wi-Fi, wellness influencers, and smartphones that never truly allow us to disconnect. The body was now viewed as a sacred temple, and temples, apparently, were best left unpainted. But deep within the forests and along the misty moors, the old traditions persevered, whispered through generations, passed down from mother to daughter, warrior to warrior. Because long before ink became associated with criminality, it was associated with tribal identity. And in the blood-soaked soils of ancient Europe, tattooing was proof of belonging to one's people, to one's land, and to one's gods. As Europe entered the extended period of the Middle Ages, tattooing receded from the public eye, but it never completely disappeared. It simply went underground. The Christian Church, now a dominant force across the continent, actively condemned tattooing. The body, according to church doctrine, was meant to remain pure, unblemished, and a vessel of holiness. Pagan customs, including tattooing, were swept aside, labeled as heathen, rebellious, or even demonic. And yet, even in this era of suppression, ink still found its way beneath the skin. Among Christian pilgrims, especially those who undertook the perilous journey to Jerusalem, tattoos became powerful symbols of devotion. A small cross tattooed on the wrist or forearm served as undeniable proof. I made it. You had survived the treacherous seas, the unforgiving deserts, and the ever-present threat of bandits, and you returned home marked by your unwavering faith. Some pilgrims even received these tattoos while in the Holy Land, etched by Coptic Christian families who had diligently preserved the sacred art for generations. These weren't decorative embellishments. They were spiritual contracts, etched reminders in flesh that proclaimed, I belong to God, and I journeyed to his city. In some monasteries, tattoos were discreetly used to identify members of specific orders. Hidden symbols, purposeful and understated. After enduring years of hardship and isolation, they viewed space as an opportunity to demonstrate their strength to the world and, more importantly, to themselves. In the United States, space exploration became a matter of both national pride and strategic imperative. Failure was not just an option, it represented a significant threat. Therefore, two nations turned their gaze toward the heavens, not with a sense of wonder, but with a sense of urgency. Rockets were no longer merely weapons. They were now the ladders to prestige. And somewhere beyond Earth's atmosphere, a silent competition had begun. A contest involving machines and humans alike. A race where the finish line wasn't a physical location, but a grand ambition. It was a clear night on October 4th, 1957, when the world was irrevocably changed, not with a sudden explosion, but with a simple beep. From a launch site located in the desolate steppes of Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union launched a small metallic sphere into orbit. It was named Sputnik 1, a shiny aluminum ball, no larger than a beach ball, weighing just under 200 pounds and featuring 4 long antennas extending from its sides. It lacked a camera and passengers. It merely possessed a radio transmitter that emitted a constant series of beeps as it circled the Earth every 96 minutes. Those beeps resonated like thunder. To the Soviets, Sputnik was a testament to their triumph, the first artificial satellite ever launched by humankind, the first object created by human hands to break free from Earth's gravitational pull. It represented an astounding technical achievement, signifying that their rockets were functional and that they held a lead. To the Americans, it was a wake-up call, presented in polished aluminum. Panic spread throughout the United States. If the Soviets were capable of launching a satellite into space, they were equally capable of launching a nuclear warhead across the ocean. Schools conducted duck-and-cover drills. The future of space exploration now includes plans for lunar colonies, Mars missions, and commercial space stations, with companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin developing the necessary infrastructure to make interplanetary travel a reality. In 2021, SpaceX's Starship completed successful test flights designed for deep space missions. NASA has partnered with private firms to build the Artemis lunar program, which aims to land humans on the moon once again, with plans for a sustainable presence by the 2020s. Space, once the domain of only the world's greatest superpowers, is now an accessible frontier for many nations and private companies. The dream of exploring Mars, of establishing a human presence on other planets, is no longer just the stuff of science fiction. It is the next great leap in human ambition. And just like during the space race, the stars are calling once again. In the vast, sun-baked expanse of Egypt, where the golden sands stretch endlessly beneath a blazing sky, there lies a mystery, a lost wonder of the ancient world. A place so incredible that, according to the great historian Herodotus, it was more magnificent than even the Great Pyramids of Giza. It was called the Labyrinth, an enormous underground complex unlike anything ever seen before, stretching far beneath the earth and the monuments of Egypt. The Egyptians themselves described it as a marvel of both architecture and ingenuity, a labyrinthine structure so intricate it defied the imagination. Herodotus, the Greek historian who traveled extensively in the 5th century BC, was one of the first to write about this astonishing sight. During his travels, he was brought to Egypt, where he had the opportunity to see the labyrinth firsthand. What he witnessed left him in awe. According to his writings, the structure was composed of vast chambers, intricately designed corridors, and towering walls, far surpassing the grandeur of any known structure at the time. He ended his description feeling amazed, saying the labyrinth was a wonder that would last for thousands of years, or so it seemed back then. But even with Herodotus's grand description, the labyrinth was lost to history. It was buried under the sands of Egypt, a mystery waiting to be found again. For centuries, the legend of this lost labyrinth has captured the imaginations of historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters. Even though Herodotus gave a vivid picture of this amazing underground complex, nobody knows exactly where it is. Scholars have spent years arguing about where it might be hidden under the Egyptian sands and whether it's still in one piece after all this time. Most people agree that it was probably located near Lake Moeris, an old man-made lake in the Egyptian desert, close to the Fayum Oasis, about 60 miles south of Cairo. Herodotus himself mentioned this area as the place where the labyrinth was, connecting it to a huge building project started by Pharaoh Amenemhat II around 1800 BCE. The Fayum Oasis, with its rich soil and closeness to the Nile River, was a prosperous area in Egypt for a long time. Many believe the labyrinth was part of a larger group of temples, maybe dedicated to Sobuk, the crocodile god, who was worshipped in that area. Some even think the labyrinth was built as a temple to Sobuk, to honor his connection to the Nile and its cycles. Over the years, people have tried to find the labyrinth, but the shifting desert sands haven't given up much solid evidence. In the 1800s, British archaeologists and explorers led trips to the Fayum area, but they only found broken pieces and unclear artifacts. They did find some interesting ruins, large stone structures that might have been part of the labyrinth's walls. But these finds weren't conclusive, and nobody has found a definite structure linked to the labyrinth itself. Instead, you'd be told to get married or have a child or both, and quickly, because according to the medical minds of the time, who were, surprise, almost exclusively male, your emotional distress was caused by your uterus being underemployed. They didn't call it anxiety, they called it furor uterinae, which sounds more like a Roman battle formation but was actually their term for female emotional instability. And if you cried too much, spoke out of turn, or seemed generally agitated, well, maybe you were just failing at your womanly duties. The cure? Childbirth, repeatedly. One Roman physician, Cyrenus, who actually wrote a gynecological textbook, recommended that women avoid strong emotions altogether. Just stop feeling things. Problem solved. He also advised husbands to be gentle, which, in Roman terms, likely meant not yelling during dinner. If you were a wealthy Roman woman and showed signs of anxiety, you might be prescribed wine and music. Not terrible until you remember that the diagnosis was still rooted in the belief that your womb was malfunctioning, like a broken machine in a bakery. For poorer women, the remedies were more direct. Herbal mixtures, spiritual rites, or just being ignored entirely. And heaven forbid you questioned your husband's authority, didn't smile at dinner, or cried too long after a miscarriage. That might get you labeled unstable or, worse, accused of being possessed by spirits or influenced by the gods. Nothing says compassionate care like a priest waving chicken bones around while you sob on a marble bench. So, while Rome gave us roads, laws, and architecture, it gave anxious women nothing but shame wrapped in olive leaves. Their pain was medicalized, moralized, and then minimized because, in the end, no one asked what they were going through. They just asked when their next child was due. Welcome to the digital age, where female anxiety no longer requires a formal diagnosis from a medical professional. All it needs is a screen. You wake up to a barrage of notifications, 37 to be exact, plus 4 new emails, a couple of calendar reminders, and a message from someone just wanting to pick your brain. You haven't even had your morning coffee, yet your heart is already racing. Anxiety in the digital realm isn't just an internal battle. It's a constant, interactive experience. You're expected to be constantly available, quick to respond, highly successful, perfectly hydrated, impeccably balanced emotionally, and, ideally, radiantly glowing. All this while sporting a carefully crafted smile on a platform that ironically labels itself social. The modern woman isn't just managing her life. She's meticulously curating her personal brand. And somehow, anxiety has become both a glaring red flag and a coveted aesthetic. Now, posts like "My anxiety is hitting hard today" can actually trend, provided they're paired with the right filter and a caption that strikes the perfect balance of self-awareness without being too messy. Vulnerability sells, but only when it's easily digestible. And if you even think about unplugging, well, good luck with that. The world certainly isn't going to wait for you. The algorithm will punish you for your absence. Emails pile up, morphing into tangible guilt. Even meditation, a supposed stress reliever, has morphed into performance art, diligently tracked by an app and meticulously graded by your smartwatch. Anxiety seems to be everywhere we turn, but so is unsolicited advice. You can endlessly scroll through reels promising to cure your nervous system in under 30 seconds. Breathwork exercises, trendy matcha lattes, journaling prompts, and tapping techniques, all potentially beneficial tools until they devolve into just another checkbox on your already impossibly long to-do list. There are also whispered accounts, though rarely confirmed, of knights during the Crusades tattooing holy relics, images of saints, or sacred words onto their arms and chests before engaging in battle. The reasoning was that, should they perish far from home, at least their body would bear the indelible mark of heaven. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the church, folk traditions stubbornly endured. In remote villages and heavily forested regions, old customs lingered on. Women tattooed protective symbols on their hands during childbirth, while shepherds inked sacred patterns onto their skin to ward off wolves. These weren't fashion statements. They were prayers rendered in pigment. But still, to be tattooed in medieval Europe was to exist on the fringes of society, viewed with spiritual suspicion and social scrutiny. Unless, of course, you were forcibly branded. Criminals, prisoners, and slaves could all be marked against their will. And in those instances, the tattoo wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. Thus, the Middle Ages became a paradox, an era in which ink was simultaneously forbidden and revered, sacred and shamed. A time when tattoos weren't loud declarations, but hushed whispers, whispers of faith, of defiance, and of the enduring human need to leave a mark, even when the world vehemently said not to. As the sails of European ships began to slice across the world's oceans in the 16th and 17th centuries, tattoos made their grand re-entry into the Western world, not through the avenues of science or religion, but through saltwater and superstition. Explorers, such as Captain James Cook, didn't merely chart coastlines. They also encountered cultures where tattooing held profound sacred significance, particularly in Polynesia. Cook's sailors, captivated by the bold patterns and the rich meanings behind the tattoos, began getting inked themselves. It was exotic, dangerous, and rebellious, all the qualities that appealed to the seafaring spirit. Headlines warned of a new red moon, and in living rooms across the country, People looked up and questioned, "Are they watching us now?" Sputnik was more than just a satellite, it was a signal. It communicated to the world that the USSR had achieved space first, transforming space into a battleground of prestige, politics, and paranoia. President Eisenhower attempted to maintain composure, asserting that the U.S. was not lagging behind. However, behind the scenes, alarm bells were sounding. Funding for science programs skyrocketed. Congress hastily established NASA. American schoolchildren were suddenly encouraged to pursue studies in math and physics, not only for career opportunities but also to safeguard freedom. Within a month, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2, carrying a passenger, Laika, a stray dog rescued from the streets of Moscow. Laika became the first living creature to orbit the Earth, although she did not survive the flight. However, the message was clear. The Soviets were not just ahead, they were accelerating. And now, for the first time, humanity was no longer alone in the stars. We had sent someone up, and the race had truly commenced. The shock of Sputnik was profound. In homes and laboratories, classrooms and Capitol Hill, the United States faced a challenging truth. It had been surpassed in space. Not by a more formidable nation, but by one that had, until recently, been a devastated wartime ally, now a fierce ideological rival. The question wasn't simply how they had achieved it, but rather what action should be taken now. The answer came swiftly. In 1958, the United States established a new agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Formed from the remnants of earlier aerospace programs, NASA was more than just an agency. It was a declaration, a commitment, a promise that America would not only catch up but also take the lead. It wasn't just a building. It was a labyrinth of monumental proportions, filled with secrets and hidden spaces. The labyrinth, Herodotus described, consisted of 12 immense courtyards surrounded by high stone walls. Inside, the chambers were filled with carvings, statues, and inscriptions depicting the gods and the kings who had ruled Egypt throughout the ages. And perhaps most intriguing of all, Herodotus wrote of the structure's sheer size, not just a few rooms or passageways, but a sprawling complex stretching over vast areas. Herodotus claimed the labyrinth was so large and complex that it was impossible to explore it fully. He even compared it to the pyramids themselves, noting that it was more wondrous and impressive. But like so many ancient marvels, the labyrinth soon faded from view, hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. Over time, the labyrinth became a legend. Despite its immense significance, it disappeared from history, buried beneath the shifting desert sands, as though the land itself had swallowed it whole. Today, scholars and archaeologists continue to search for the lost labyrinth, hoping to uncover its secrets and unlock the mysteries that have remained hidden for centuries. The labyrinth that Herodotus described was not just a building. It was a masterpiece of design, one so intricate that it seemed to stretch the very limits of human ingenuity. According to his account, the structure was more than just a collection of rooms or passageways. It was a vast, sprawling complex. Its scale and complexity were a testament to the ancient Egyptians' mastery of architecture and engineering. Herodotus famously noted that the labyrinth consisted of 12 courtyards, each one separated by towering stone walls that encased the labyrinth like a series of fortress-like enclosures. These walls were adorned with intricate carvings and scenes depicting the gods, the kings, and the mythological creatures that populated Egyptian beliefs. Nowadays, we have new technologies like satellite images, ground-penetrating radar, and drones that give us new hope of finding it. The desert is still huge, and the sand keeps moving, burying anything that might be underneath. In recent years, some researchers think they might be getting closer to finding the labyrinth, suggesting it could be buried under what looks like a series of vast, unexplored ruins near the Fayum. Still, nobody knows exactly where it is, and the possibility that it's still hidden under the sand is both exciting and frustrating. Like many great mysteries from the ancient world, the lost labyrinth calls out to anyone who dares to uncover its secrets. The question isn't just where it is, but what treasures and secrets it might still hold inside. The lost labyrinth of Egypt wasn't just a big building. It was part of a much bigger picture, full of symbols and spiritual meaning. To really understand what it meant, you have to think about how it relates to Egypt's other great wonders, especially the pyramids, which have always been seen as the peak of ancient Egyptian building skills. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, shows how powerful Egypt was and how complex their religious and building systems were. It's no surprise that Herodotus compared the labyrinth to the pyramids, seeing them both as products of the same culture and beliefs. While the pyramids are usually linked to burying kings and the afterlife, the labyrinth might have had a different purpose, but one that was just as full of symbolism. Some theories say it was built as a temple complex dedicated not to just one god, but to all the cosmic forces in Egypt, including the many gods and myths that controlled the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Like the pyramids, the labyrinth's design could have been tied to Egyptian ideas about the universe. Ancient Egyptians believed in a universe with many layers, mixing the physical and spiritual worlds. Now, let's walk softly into the shadowy corridors of the Middle Ages, a time when knights roamed, plagues bloomed, and if a woman had anxiety, it probably meant Satan was renting space in her soul. Medical understanding didn't just stall during this period. It practically reversed into oncoming traffic. The Greek ideas of womb wandering were still hanging around, but now they were seasoned with a generous dose of fear, fire, and holy panic. Women who experienced what we now call anxiety, trembling, crying, panic attacks, intrusive thoughts were often seen as spiritually compromised. Because clearly, if your hands shook or you wept at night, it wasn't trauma, it was demons. The church dominated the landscape of healing, and that healing often came in the form of exorcisms, public humiliation, or, if things escalated, a bonfire with your name on it. If a woman admitted to hearing voices or simply seemed off, she could be accused of witchcraft. Herbal remedies? Suspicious. Knowledge of the stars? Satanic. Crying too much? Clearly a gateway to evil in this era. Anxiety wasn't just misunderstood. It was feared, and fear in the wrong woman's body could get her locked in a convent, dunked in a river, or tried in a courtroom where the evidence included she looked weird during Mass. There were also monasteries and infirmaries where nuns attempted to care for women with mental distress. But without any true understanding of the mind, treatment usually meant long prayers, isolation, and fasting, because nothing soothes the soul like low blood sugar and total silence. And let's not forget the diagnostic tools of the day. If your anxiety caused you to faint or tremble, someone might press a cross to your forehead and see if you flinched. If you did, well, say goodbye to your goats and prepare to meet the village torchbearer. It's tragic, really. These women weren't witches or sinners or hosts for demonic spirits. And despite all the noise, the underlying root of women's anxiety remains surprisingly consistent. Pressure. The relentless pressure to be universally liked, wildly successful, constantly informed, immediately responsive, flawlessly healthy, impossibly thin, impeccably ethical, unfailingly kind, ruthlessly efficient, endlessly creative, genuinely funny, but not too funny. And, of course, don't forget to promptly reply to your boss, your best friend, and that never-ending mom group chat that seemingly operates on a 24/7 cycle. Is it any wonder your chest feels tight and constricted? Because in this age of constant connectivity, where we're expected to be on 24/7, simply resting feels like a radical act of defiance. Silence feels inherently suspicious, and true peace, that's practically a full-time job in and of itself. But here's a quiet truth. Your anxiety isn't a malfunction or a glitch in the system. It's a signal. It's telling you that your nervous system simply wasn't designed to handle this relentless barrage of noise and expectations. After centuries of being silenced, medicated into oblivion, shamed for our emotions, and scrolled into a state of perpetual exhaustion, something truly unexpected is beginning to unfold. Women are consciously choosing to slow down, not because the world has suddenly become more accommodating or relaxed its demands. It hasn't. But because more and more women are recognizing that frantically racing to meet impossible standards inevitably leads to one grim destination: burnout, often served with a generous helping of existential dread. So now, in quiet corners of the internet and in the hushed intimacy of living rooms, in yoga studios and therapy circles, a quiet, understated revolution is taking place. It's not loud or flashy. is not engineered to go viral. It doesn't involve matching athleisure wear or quoting productivity gurus. It simply rests. Rest as resistance. Rest as reclaiming what was lost. From there, tattooing spread through the ports like spilled rum, taking root and transforming. Sailors began to develop their own unique tattoo culture, a blend of survival instincts, maritime traditions, and the desire to boast of their adventures. A ship's anchor tattooed on the forearm signified that one had crossed the Atlantic. A turtle meant you had crossed the equator, officially becoming a shellback. A pig and a rooster tattooed on the feet were believed to be charms against drowning because, as odd as it sounds, those were often the only animals to survive shipwrecks, bobbing safely in their wooden crates. Each tattoo carried a specific meaning, although those meanings often shifted with the tides. An image of a dagger piercing a heart might signify lost love, or simply a rough night spent in a Caribbean tavern. The words "hold fast" across the knuckles served as a prayer for a firm grip, not on life in general, but on wet rigging during stormy seas. Tattooing became an unofficial language among sailors. Regardless of your flag, your native tongue, or your luck with rum, ink could tell your story. It was a shared identity forged in an ocean of loneliness. In dockside towns and cities like New York, London, and Lisbon, tattoo parlors began to emerge, small, smoky rooms filled with ink pots and tales from faraway lands. These weren't the highly skilled artists of sacred temples. They were often former sailors themselves, frequently utilizing homemade needles and gunpowder soot for ink. But for men who faced the constant threat of drowning, disease, and mutiny, a little pain in exchange for a permanent memory didn't seem like such a bad deal. Tattoos became keepsakes, confessions, and maps of the places you'd been and the parts of yourself you couldn't bear to leave behind. In an era when most people's stories faded with time, sailors etched theirs in ink, allowing the sea to carry them into legend. However, the first American satellite, Explorer 1, wasn't launched until January 31st, 1958, nearly 4 months after Sputnik. Nevertheless, it carried more than just a radio beep. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, demonstrating that the U.S. wasn't merely following, but was actively contributing to scientific knowledge. The space race had evolved into a national mission. Television programs featured space science for children. Schools incorporated rocket math into their curricula. Funding for science, engineering, and math experienced a surge. American identity was now linked to the cosmos. However, politics has always guided the rocket's trajectory. This wasn't merely about curiosity. It was about Cold War dominance. Space was the new high ground. Whoever controlled it would control communications, defense, and prestige. The U.S. feared being perceived as falling behind in the eyes of the world, especially among newly independent nations deciding between capitalist democracy and communist rule. Enter Project Mercury, America's first human spaceflight program. 7 test pilots, later known as the Mercury 7, were selected to represent not only NASA, but the hopes of an entire nation. They underwent secret training, enduring grueling physical and psychological tests, and they were transformed into heroes even before they had left the ground. Meanwhile, the Soviets were preparing to raise the stakes even higher because satellites were merely the beginning. The next objective was clear: to send a human into space and bring them back safely. For America, the challenge was no longer hypothetical. It was real, personal, urgent, and it was only a matter of time before someone, Soviet or American, would risk their life to cross that invisible boundary between Earth and everything beyond it. April 12, 1961. Just after sunrise in the Kazakh desert, a slender silver rocket stood on the launch pad, tall, silent, and poised to alter history. Some of these depictions were said to be so detailed that they appeared almost lifelike, a breathtaking blend of art and architecture. What made the labyrinth so unique was its sheer scale. Herodotus described the labyrinth as having a vast network of interconnected chambers, some so large that they could house entire villages within their walls. He went on to compare it to the pyramids in terms of magnificence. Though, unlike the pyramids, which had a singular focus, the labyrinth seemed to hold endless secrets, each turn, each passageway, leading to another mystery. Herodotus also noted the astonishing number of statues within the labyrinth. These statues were not just simple representations. They were said to be works of immense artistic skill. Some of these statues were crafted to resemble the gods of Egypt, while others were of the pharaohs themselves, immortalized in stone. One particularly striking description involved a colossal statue of the god Osiris, which towered over the labyrinth's central chamber, serving as a constant reminder of the divine presence that pervaded the entire complex. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Herodotus's account was his description of the labyrinth's layout. The rooms and passageways were not just haphazardly arranged. They were designed to confuse, to create a sense of mystery, a true labyrinth in every sense of the word. Herodotus said it was impossible to explore the entire structure in a single visit. It was too vast, too intricate. He ended his description with an air of awe, noting that the labyrinth was a permanent wonder, one that would stand for millennia, or so it seemed at the time. But despite the grandeur of Herodotus's account, the labyrinth was lost to history, hidden beneath the sands of Egypt, a mystery waiting to be rediscovered. The legend of the lost labyrinth has haunted historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters for centuries. The labyrinth, with its long hallways and hidden rooms, could have represented the soul's journey through the afterlife. Just like the pyramids were designed as tombs to help the pharaoh move on to the next life, the comparison between the pyramids and the labyrinth suggests that both were more than just impressive building projects. They were symbols of life's great mysteries. Some experts even think the labyrinth might have been used for rituals, where people would go through tests and spiritual experiences in its hallways, showing the soul's journey through the underworld, a path to spiritual enlightenment, much like the spiritual journey symbolized by the pyramids. Plus, Herodotus himself thought the labyrinth had a complex network of hallways and rooms, similar to the inside of the pyramids. This idea points to a deep connection in how they were built, a shared symbolic goal of guiding both the living and the dead through places that blurred the lines between the real world and the afterlife. Even though we don't know exactly how the labyrinth and the pyramids were connected, one thing is clear. Both structures showed the grand vision of ancient Egypt, a civilization that looked beyond the physical world to the mysteries of the cosmos and eternity. The lost labyrinth of Egypt wasn't just a building for practical things like a palace or a market. Its very existence was mysterious, and its design suggests it was a place of deep spiritual meaning. The complex maze of hallways and rooms, its detailed layout, and its sheer size all point to a deeper purpose than just being a building. Many theories suggest it was a sacred place, where ancient rituals and religious ceremonies were held. The labyrinth might have been a temple complex dedicated to the worship of many gods, with the Egyptian gods playing key roles in its design. They were people in pain, people trying to breathe through sorrow, trying to sleep through dread. But in a world built on fear, a woman who trembled became a threat, and threats were burned, not understood. The Renaissance, a golden age of rebirth, art, science, and literature. Everything was being rediscovered except, unfortunately, compassion for women's mental health, that apparently stayed locked in a medieval cellar. While Michelangelo was chiseling David and Da Vinci was sketching helicopters, doctors were still trying to figure out why women had feelings. And, surprise, the leading theory was still the same tired villain, the uterus. Though ancient texts resurfaced, they were often filtered through newer, more refined interpretations, which is a fancy way of saying they still blamed women's emotions on being too female. Anxious? That's because you're not married. Panicking? You need to conceive. Depressed? Time for a good leeching. Yes, leeches. Or, if you were lucky, cupping bleeding or a hot poultice to your abdomen. Doctors truly believed the body needed to be balanced. And for women, that meant draining them until their soul quieted down, or at least until they fainted and stopped talking. And the remedies didn't end there. There were also soothing rituals like being confined to a dark room for days or being advised not to read, because a woman with too many books might start thinking, and thinking, of course, was hazardous to your womb stability. In elite households, women suffering from nervous complaints might be sent to the countryside for rest, which sounded nice on paper but often meant being watched, silenced, and dosed with herbal tonics until they smiled again, or at least pretended to. The Renaissance loved beauty. It celebrated harmony and proportion. but it did not know what to do with a woman who wept uncontrollably or couldn't sleep through the night. Rest as the long-forbidden medicine that women have been denied for centuries. Not the forced, prescribed rest of Victorian-era doctors, but the actively chosen kind. The kind that confidently declares, "I don't owe anyone my exhaustion." Women are learning to say no, not as a sign of failure or inadequacy, but as a healthy assertion of personal boundaries. They're canceling plans, logging off their devices, and even daring to let the dishes sit in the sink overnight. And shockingly, the world continues to spin on its axis. It's not easy, of course. The guilt still lingers, whispering insidious doubts. Asterisk, you should be doing more. You should be more productive. Asterisk, but now, another voice is rising alongside it. A gentler, more compassionate voice. Asterisk, you've done enough for today. Just breathe. Communities are forming around this shared truth. Groups of women who create safe spaces for one another, offering support and understanding without judgment. Who offer a simple, validating "me too," instead of the dismissive, "why can't you just push through it?" They're actively rewriting the narrative, one exhale at a time. They're learning that healing isn't a linear process. Some days you'll feel motivated to meditate, journal your thoughts, and take a refreshing walk in nature. Other days, you'll find yourself crying into your bowl of cereal and deleting everything from your meticulously planned calendar. Both are perfectly okay. And maybe, just maybe, experiencing anxiety doesn't mean you're fundamentally broken or flawed. Maybe it simply means you're awake and aware in a world that desperately tries to numb you into submission. So tonight, if your mind is racing or your heart feels heavy, please remember this. You are not a machine. You were never meant to be a machine. And in a culture that obsessively worships hustle and productivity, consciously choosing to rest, to truly rest, isn't a sign of weakness. By the late 19th century, tattooing was no longer exclusively the domain of sailors or societal outsiders. Thanks to a technological spark, quite literally, from electricity, tattoos were stepping boldly into the modern world. In 1891, Samuel O'Reilly, a New York-based tattooist, patented the first electric tattoo machine. Inspired by Thomas Edison's electric pen, O'Reilly's device allowed for faster, more precise work with significantly less bleeding. Suddenly, tattoos could be completed in a matter of hours, rather than days. Pain was still part of the experience, but the process now felt less like a surgical procedure and more like an art form. This ushered in a new era, the tattoo as a form of performance. Circus sideshows and dime museums began to showcase tattooed men and women as objects of curiosity. There was Captain George Constantinos, the tattooed Greek prince, whose entire body was covered in intricate Eastern designs. And there was Nora Hildebrandt, one of America's first tattooed ladies, whose extensive ink was rivaled only by the dramatic and likely embellished tale of her captivity and forced tattooing by a savage tribe. These performers weren't merely oddities. They were living exhibitions. Their bodies became walking, talking stories, drawing massive crowds and challenging Victorian-era notions of propriety, especially when a woman dared to remove her sleeves and reveal a serpent coiled around her shoulder. Yet, tattoos still remained somewhat taboo among respectable society. If you sported ink, it was automatically assumed to mean something specific about your life. You'd been to war, to sea, to jail, or perhaps you'd run away with the circus. And yet, behind closed doors, members of the elite were also quietly getting tattooed. It's rumored that both King Edward VII and his son, the future King George V, had tattoos, one with a Jerusalem cross, the other with a dragon etched during a visit to Japan. Inside it sat a 27-year-old Soviet pilot named Yuri Gagarin. He was calm, smiling, even dressed in an orange flight suit and a white helmet. He resembled more of a test pilot than a pioneer. However, what he was about to accomplish had never been done before: to leave Earth entirely. At 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, the Vostok 1 spacecraft roared to life. Gagarin's voice crackled through the radio with a single word that would echo across the planet: "Poyekali! Let's go!" With that, he became the first human being to enter space. The flight lasted a mere 108 minutes. Gagarin completed one full orbit around Earth, reaching a peak altitude of 187 miles and traveling at over 17,000 miles per hour. He gazed down and observed our planet from above. The blue curve of Earth, the blackness of space, and no borders. He later described his observations with simple wonder. "The Earth is blue. How beautiful. It is amazing." However, make no mistake, this wasn't merely a moment of human achievement. It was a geopolitical earthquake. The Soviets had accomplished it first. Again, following Sputnik and Laika, they had now sent a man into space and returned him safely. Gagarin didn't just orbit Earth. He orbited every front page on the planet. The Soviets paraded him like a champion, a symbol of socialist superiority and scientific might. The United States, stunned once more, scrambled to respond. President Kennedy, only a few months into his presidency, now faced the pressure to match and surpass the Soviet triumph. Yuri Gagarin returned to Earth a hero, landing in a field and startling a farmer and her daughter before calmly explaining that he had come from space. He never flew in space again, but his name was forever etched into history, because on that day, humanity crossed a line we'd only ever imagined. We were no longer confined to Earth. One man, one orbit, and the space race had officially entered its most human chapter. Despite Herodotus's vivid description of the magnificent underground complex, the labyrinth's exact location remains a mystery. Scholars have long debated where it might be hidden beneath the Egyptian sands and whether it still lies intact beneath the layers of time and shifting dunes. Most agree that the labyrinth was most likely situated near Lake Moeris, an ancient artificial lake in the Egyptian desert near the Fayum oasis, about 60 miles south of Cairo. Herodotus himself had mentioned this location as the site of the labyrinth, linking it to the impressive structure built by the pharaoh Amenemhat II during the 12th dynasty, around 1800 BCE. The Fayum oasis, with its fertile lands and proximity to the Nile, had long been a thriving area of Egypt, and many believe that the labyrinth was part of a larger temple complex. This complex might have been dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek, whose ancient cult was centered around the area. Some theories even suggest that the labyrinth was built as a temple to Sobek, perhaps to honor his association with the Nile and its cycles. Over the years, various attempts to locate the labyrinth have been made, but the shifting desert sands have provided little in the way of concrete evidence. In the 19th century, British archaeologists and explorers led expeditions into the Fayum region, but they came back with only fragmented remnants and unclear artifacts. They found some curious ruins, large rectangular stone structures, which some believed might have been part of the labyrinth's walls. But these findings were inconclusive, and no one has yet identified a definitive structure connected to the labyrinth itself. In modern times, technologies such as satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and drones have provided new hope for discovering the labyrinth. The desert is still vast, and the sand continues to shift and bury anything that might lie beneath. The Egyptians were very religious, and their monuments often had spiritual meanings, each structure representing different parts of the afterlife, the order of the universe, and the journey of the soul. One interesting theory is that the labyrinth was a representation of the afterlife itself. In ancient Egyptian belief, the journey to the afterlife was complicated and dangerous. The soul of the dead had to overcome many challenges to reach the divine realm. The labyrinth, with its maze-like structure and hidden rooms, could have symbolized the trials the soul had to face in the afterlife. Just as the dead had to find their way through the labyrinth's winding passages, they also had to navigate the journey through the underworld, guided by the gods and their faith. The labyrinth could also have been a place for rituals, where priests and new members went through spiritual tests. Some think it was the site of ancient Egyptian mystery schools, where sacred knowledge was shared with chosen people. These people might have been led through the labyrinth in a carefully planned ritual that mirrored their journey to spiritual enlightenment. The idea of a physical labyrinth representing the soul's journey is powerful because it would create a direct link between the physical and spiritual worlds, connecting the ancient Egyptians' understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Another theory says the labyrinth was connected to the stars. The ancient Egyptians paid close attention to the stars, which guided their farming calendar and religious practices. The labyrinth could have been built in line with the stars, with its passages and chambers reflecting the patterns of the night sky, perhaps mirroring the path of the sun or the soul's journey through the stars. Whatever its true purpose, the lost labyrinth remains a mystery. Emotional pain, especially in women, was seen as unruly, unbalanced, and inconvenient, so it was muted, draped in silk, locked behind chamber doors, and dismissed as womanly trouble. And in the grand halls where paintings were born and symphonies were composed, women with anxiety walked silently, heads bowed, wondering if perhaps the problem really was inside them. Not the world, not the pressure, not the grief, just them. Because in the age of enlightenment, a woman's fear was still considered a flaw to be hidden, not a wound to be heard. As we step into the 17th and 18th centuries, the world is buzzing with progress. Telescopes are peering into the heavens, philosophers are pondering liberty and reason, and Isaac Newton is explaining gravity, finally giving people a better excuse for falling apart. But if you were a woman during the Enlightenment, suffering from anxiety, all that rationality didn't do you much good. Because while the world was discovering natural laws and human rights, your trembling hands and sleepless nights were still being filed under female problems. Medical men, now wearing powdered wigs and very serious expressions, were beginning to write about the nervous system. They even had a name for women like you, nervous ladies. It sounded polite, maybe even elegant. But behind the label was the same old belief. Women were emotionally delicate, spiritually frail, and biologically built for breakdowns. The uterus, thankfully, had stopped its wandering. But now, doctors said women had too many nerves, too much stimulation, too much imagination. In short, the Enlightenment determined that women were simply too much. If you cried often, became overwhelmed, or had panic attacks, you might be prescribed rest, warm baths, mild walks, or everyone's favorite, laudanum, a lovely little cocktail of alcohol and opium. Laudanum could quiet your anxiety, your pain, and possibly your pulse, but at least you weren't complaining anymore. It's an act of profound wisdom, ancient, sacred, and revolutionary. Long before the advent of selfies, sailor sleeves, or regrettable lower back tattoos, people were adorning their bodies with ink. In fact, the earliest known tattoos weren't sported by rebellious teenagers or battle-hardened warriors. They belonged to a man frozen in time, literally. The Iceman, discovered high in the Alps in 1991, is over 5,000 years old. His body, remarkably preserved by snow, time, and a stroke of luck, is etched with 61 tattoos, consisting of simple black lines and crosses. No skulls, no dragons, just lines. But here's the fascinating part. These lines weren't randomly placed. They were strategically located on his joints, spine, and ankles. Modern researchers believe they may have served as an early form of acupuncture or pain relief, an ancient blend of medicine and ritual, etched into the skin using soot and sharp tools. Primitive, certainly, but also deeply intentional. These weren't tattoos meant for display. They were tattoos for survival. The Iceman wasn't alone. Across ancient Egypt, tattooed mummies, primarily women, have been unearthed, their bodies adorned with intricate dot patterns. Some archaeologists theorize that these were symbols of fertility, intended to protect both mother and child during childbirth. Others believe they were signs of devotion to the goddess Hathor. Regardless of their precise meaning, these tattoos weren't merely ornamental. They were spiritual, protective, and meant to be carried proudly into the afterlife. In Siberia, tattooed Scythian nobles were discovered buried in icy tombs, their bodies decorated with mythical creatures. Deer, panthers, and griffins, all curling across their arms and torsos in bold black ink. For these individuals, tattoos served as a warrior's mark, a passport into the afterlife, and potentially even a symbol of social rank. Aristocrats across Europe and even some members of American high society began to explore the novelty of body art discreetly, privately, and always with plausible deniability. Tattoo parlors flourished in port cities, and new ones began popping up in urban centers. 2 small studios tucked between barbershops and billiard halls. And while the vast majority of artists were still men, women were beginning to enter the craft, needle in hand. The ink was spreading, no longer solely a mark of rebellion or outsider status. It was gradually evolving into a medium for memory, identity, or simply the thrill of adorning oneself with something that no one could ever take away. As the 20th century marched forward, with its towering skyscrapers, sweeping revolutions, and devastating wars, tattoos continued their quiet evolution, though not always in the most glamorous or visible settings. Behind prison walls, within locked cells and concrete yards, a new language of ink was being written not on paper, but on skin. These weren't the polished, professionally done tattoos found in studios. They were handmade, raw, and created using contraband needles fashioned from guitar strings, melted plastic, and ink brewed from soot and toothpaste. Painful, absolutely. Precise, rarely. Meaningful, always. In prisons across the world, from Russia's gulags to American penitentiaries, tattoos became a complex and secretive code. Every image told a story. Every placement carried significant weight. A spiderweb on the elbow signified time served. A teardrop near the eye represented a life taken or a life lost. 5 dots on the hand, with 4 at the corners and 1 in the center, meant I am surrounded. In Soviet prisons, tattooing evolved into a detailed system of status and survival. A cathedral inked across the chest could indicate years spent behind bars, each dome representing a sentence. Just weeks after Yuri Gagarin made history, the United States was reeling, but not defeated. The Soviets had claimed the initial victory in human spaceflight, but America had its own strategy in motion to match and ultimately surpass the Soviet achievements. America's first step, Alan Shepard. On May 5, 1961, Shepard, a Navy test pilot, climbed into the Mercury Redstone 3 spacecraft, nicknamed Freedom 7. Shepard's mission wasn't to orbit the Earth. Instead, his was a suborbital flight, a brief but crucial hop into space that would prove the U.S. could send humans into the skies and bring them back alive. The stakes were high. Shepard's flight was only going to last 15 minutes, a brief moment in space, but it was a public declaration. The United States was in the race, and it wasn't about to lose it. The countdown commenced, and at 9:34 a.m., the rocket launched with a roar that shook the ground. Shepard soared upward, climbing to 116 miles above Earth, entering space for just a few minutes. As he floated weightlessly, he experienced a moment of awe, looking down on the blue planet below him. He didn't have the chance to look long. After a short, thrilling journey, Shepard's flight took a sharp descent and landed in the Atlantic Ocean. Shepard was immediately rescued by a Navy ship, and as he stepped out of his capsule, he was hailed as a hero, the first American in space. Shepard's flight wasn't as impressive in terms of time or distance as Gagarin's orbital mission, but it was a crucial step in the U.S. space program. It proved the Americans could launch men into space, and more importantly, they could bring them back safely. The United States had entered the race, and while it had been a short flight, it was a long leap toward the ultimate goal, the moon. Shepard's success spurred NASA into action. The Mercury program's initial success now paved the way for the Gemini and Apollo programs. In recent years, some researchers believe they may be closing in on the labyrinth's location, suggesting that the complex could be buried beneath what appears to be a series of vast, unexplored ruins near the Fayum. Still, the labyrinth's exact location remains elusive, and the possibility of it still being hidden beneath the sand is both tantalizing and frustrating. As with many great mysteries of the ancient world, the lost labyrinth calls out to those who dare to uncover its secrets. The question is not only where it lies, but what treasures or even secrets it might still hold within its walls. The lost labyrinth of Egypt was not just a monumental structure. It was part of a much larger symbolic and spiritual landscape. To understand the significance of the labyrinth, one must consider its relationship to Egypt's other great wonders, particularly the pyramids, which have long been considered the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian architectural achievement. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu, stands as a testament to Egypt's power and the complexity of their religious and architectural systems. It is no surprise that Herodotus, when describing the labyrinth, would compare it to the pyramids, considering them both products of the same cultural and spiritual world. While the pyramids are often associated with the burial of kings and the afterlife, the labyrinth may have had a different function, yet equally steeped in symbolism. Some theories suggest that the labyrinth was built as a temple complex dedicated not to one specific god, but to the broader cosmic forces of Egypt, incorporating the various gods and mythologies that govern the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Like the pyramids, the labyrinth's design could have been tied to Egyptian cosmology. Ancient Egyptians believed in a complex, layered universe, one that blended the material and spiritual realms. Its symbolism, secrets, and deep connection to the ancient Egyptian worldview continue to fascinate those who seek to uncover the secrets buried beneath the sands. For centuries, the lost labyrinth of Egypt has remained a mystery, buried beneath the shifting sands of time. But the fascination with this incredible structure hasn't faded. Archaeologists, historians, and explorers are still searching for it, hoping that modern technology and a renewed sense of curiosity might finally reveal the secrets hidden beneath Egypt's vast desert. The search for the labyrinth has been long and difficult. Early explorers and archaeologists, with the limited tools they had, searched in vain for the legendary site. In the 1800s, European expeditions ventured into the desert, especially around the Fayum oasis and Lake Moeris, which Herodotus had pointed out as the labyrinth's possible location. However, these early searches didn't find much beyond scattered ruins and unclear remnants, enough to spark interest, but not enough to make any solid discoveries. In the 1900s and 2000s, the search for the labyrinth gained new energy thanks to advances in technology. Satellite images, ground-penetrating radar, and modern digging methods have provided new tools in the quest for this lost wonder. With the help of aerial surveys and satellite imaging, researchers have been able to scan huge stretches of the desert where the labyrinth is thought to be. Some experts believe that hidden beneath the sands are the remains of massive stone structures, echoes of the great labyrinth that Herodotus described. One of the main locations always linked to the labyrinth is the area around Lake Moeris and the Fayum oasis, near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis. According to Herodotus and other ancient sources, this is where the labyrinth was built. The Fayum region was a fertile oasis, and its importance in Egyptian civilization makes it a good candidate for being the home of the labyrinth. For wealthier women, there were nervous retreats where you'd be waited on by servants while being gently discouraged from reading, thinking, or discussing anything upsetting, such as your own emotions. Poorer women didn't have the luxury of sedation. They simply endured. And if you dared express anger or frustration, or, heaven forbid, ambition, you might be considered not just anxious, but unstable, dangerous, mad. Your husband could have you confined. No trial, no explanation, just a signature in silence. This was the Enlightenment. Reason for men, sedation for women, public discourse for philosophers, private despair for housewives, logic-built libraries, fear-locked doors. So, as the world basked in the light of discovery, women with anxiety sat quietly in the shadows, medicated, misunderstood, and told that their pain was just a passing flutter of nerves. Nothing to worry about. Just breathe and don't think too hard. Now, we drift into the 19th century, the Victorian age, where everything looks elegant on the surface. Corsets are tight, manners are tighter, and emotional expression, especially for women, is considered downright indecent. Anxiety hasn't disappeared. It's just been rebranded. Welcome to the age of the rest cure, developed by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, a man with a fine mustache and questionable empathy. The rest cure was prescribed to women suffering from what was still broadly labeled as nervous disorders. You felt anxious, exhausted, depressed? The solution: lie in bed for weeks or months. No reading, no writing, no visitors, no talking about your feelings. Just a plush room, heavy curtains, boiled milk, and the slowly creeping sensation that you might be losing your mind, which, ironically, you probably were, thanks to the treatment. Women were expected to surrender to stillness, to melt into passivity. Movement was rebellion, thought was dangerous. These weren't necessarily the first humans to tattoo themselves. They're simply the first whose tattooed bodies we've managed to find. And that's a fundamental truth about the history of tattoos. It didn't begin with pop culture trends. It began with ritual, with pain, and with deeply considered intention. Tattoos were never solely about aesthetics. They were medicine, memory, and protection. Long before ink became associated with rebellion, it was associated with reverence, a sacred thread that wound its way through the skin. A way to tell stories when written language was absent, to mark meaning before we even had words for things. So, the next time you encounter a simple line of ink, remember that someone, thousands of years ago, created that same mark using fire and ash, and it meant everything. To truly understand the soul of tattooing, we have to travel across the ocean to the islands of Polynesia, where ink was not a fleeting fashion statement, but a sacred ceremony. In places like Samoa, Tonga, and Tahiti, tattoos weren't chosen on a whim. They were sacred, earned, and carried for life. The very word tattoo originates from the Polynesian word tata, meaning to strike, a direct reference to the sound produced by the tapping of ink into the skin using carved bone tools. This wasn't a machine, it was rhythm. Tata was far more than just body art. It was a rite of passage, often incredibly painful, but always deeply meaningful. A young Samoan man would lie on a woven mat while the tattooist or tafuga worked tirelessly for days, sometimes even weeks, tapping intricate geometric patterns into his body using sharpened bone and soot. The design would typically stretch from the waist to the knees, serving as a powerful symbol of adulthood, personal identity, and bravery. The pain wasn't incidental. It was an integral part of the ritual. To endure the pain was to prove one's readiness for adulthood and responsibility. Stars on the shoulders marked a high-ranking inmate not to be trifled with, but falsely claiming a rank through ink could be a fatal mistake. These tattoos weren't mere decorations. They were armor, resumes, warnings, and prayers all rolled into one. In the United States, prison tattoos carried similar weight, signifying gang affiliations, racial lines, territorial claims, and personal losses. The tattoo gun was often a shared, communal tool. The ink passed between inmates like forbidden communion. For many, their first tattoo wasn't a choice. It was a brutal rite of passage. But even outside the prison walls, these prison-born styles began to seep into the wider world. Tattoo artists, particularly those in urban areas, began incorporating the stark, bold lines of prison art into their own work. What originated as a means of survival behind bars gradually evolved into a recognizable style, replicated in tattoo shops, immortalized in movies, and echoed in street culture. Still, the stigma lingered. A visible tattoo, particularly one on the hands, neck, or face, often meant closed doors, judgment, and suspicion. The ink might fade over time, but the assumptions remained. Yet for those who wore them, these marks weren't a source of shame. They were stories of survival, of time endured, and of identity carved in silence. Because sometimes, when no one else listens, the skin speaks volumes. By the dawn of the 21st century, tattoos had undergone their most significant transformation yet, evolving from ancient rites to outlaw codes to something entirely different. A canvas for self-expression. What was once hidden beneath sleeves or spoken about in hushed, judgmental tones was now proudly displayed on runways, in boardrooms, and across social media feeds. From baristas to CEOs, kindergarten teachers to veterans, ink was no longer primarily a symbol of rebellion. It had become a declaration of individuality. The rise of modern tattoo studios mirrored this cultural shift. The U.S. was now determined to go further, to go higher, and above all, to reach the ultimate frontier. The race to the moon wasn't just about rockets anymore. It was about pride, about the human will to reach beyond. And the stakes had never been higher. With Alan Shepard's suborbital flight and the brief but groundbreaking Mercury missions behind them, the United States had proven it could send humans into space. But now NASA had to answer a bigger question. Could they go further? Could they stay in space longer? And most importantly, could they reach the moon? Enter the Gemini program, the bridge between Mercury and the Apollo missions, the critical testing ground for technologies and techniques that would be required to land a human on the moon. Launched in 1965, the Gemini program was designed to test the limits of human spaceflight. It was bigger, bolder, and more ambitious. The Gemini spacecraft was twice as large as the Mercury capsule and could carry 2 astronauts, making it the first program to push the boundaries of extended space missions. Gemini's first flight, Gemini 3, took place on March 23, 1965, with astronauts Virgil Gus Grissom and John Young aboard. Their mission was brief, a simple orbit of Earth, but it marked a crucial turning point in human space exploration. Grissom's flight lasted just 5 hours, but it proved that two men could survive together in space, that they could pilot a spacecraft, and that they could manage critical life support systems in orbit. The Gemini missions began to increase in complexity. Gemini 4 in June 1965 marked the first American spacewalk with astronaut Ed White floating in the vacuum of space for 23 minutes. This was an enormous step forward, demonstrating that humans could operate outside the confines of their spacecraft, a skill that would be essential for lunar exploration. The labyrinth, with its vast corridors and hidden chambers, could have symbolized the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Much like the pyramids, which were designed as tombs to facilitate the pharaoh's passage into the next life, the comparison between the pyramids and the labyrinth suggests that both were not simply monumental feats of engineering, but symbolic representations of life's great mysteries. Some scholars even propose that the labyrinth might have served a ritualistic function where initiates would go through a series of trials and spiritual experiences within its corridors, reflecting the journey of the soul through the underworld, a passageway to divine enlightenment, much like the spiritual journey that was symbolized by the pyramids. Moreover, Herodotus himself believed that the labyrinth had an intricate network of passages and chambers, similar in their complexity to the passages inside the pyramids. This idea suggests a deep architectural connection, a shared symbolic purpose to guide both the living and the dead through spaces that blurred the boundaries between the material world and the afterlife. Though the exact connection between the labyrinth and the pyramids remains unclear, one thing is certain. Both structures embodied the grand vision of ancient Egypt, a civilization that looked beyond the physical world toward the mysteries of the cosmos and the eternal. The lost labyrinth of Egypt was not simply a structure built for practical purposes like a palace or a marketplace. Its existence was shrouded in mystery, and the very design of the labyrinth suggests it was a place of profound spiritual and symbolic significance. The complex network of corridors and chambers, its intricate layout, and its scale all point to a deeper purpose, one that goes beyond mere architecture. Many theories suggest that the labyrinth was a sacred site, a place where ancient rituals and religious ceremonies were held. Over the years, archaeologists have found traces of ancient stone foundations and architectural remnants in this area, although they haven't yet found definite proof of the labyrinth itself. In recent decades, there have been occasional reports of underwater ruins found in the area around Lake Moeris, sparking new interest in the site. Some experts think that parts of the labyrinth might be submerged beneath the lake, hidden by thousands of years of sediment and water. Others speculate that the labyrinth could be buried under a sand dune near the remains of ancient Egyptian cities or temples. Despite these advances, finding the labyrinth remains a challenge. But the search is far from over. Each new dig, every new scan of the desert, brings a glimmer of hope that one day the lost labyrinth might emerge again, offering its secrets to the modern world. The sands of Egypt might hold more than just a forgotten building. They might hold the keys to understanding the deep spiritual and architectural genius of one of history's most remarkable civilizations. The search for the lost labyrinth isn't just an archaeological quest. It's an attempt to uncover a hidden chapter of Egypt's history, a chapter that could change our understanding of the ancient world. If the labyrinth is ever found, it would give us new insights into the architecture, religion, and daily life of one of the most advanced civilizations in history. One of the most exciting possibilities about the labyrinth is that it holds ancient Egyptian knowledge that has been lost for thousands of years. With its intricate hallways, chambers, and symbolic carvings, it could be a storehouse of sacred texts or ritual knowledge. Some scholars speculate that it could contain documents that explain the deeper spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians, shedding light on the mysteries of the afterlife, the gods they worshipped, and the rituals they performed to help the soul move on to the next world. If you dared resist, you were said to be resisting healing, which conveniently meant more confinement. This was not a fringe treatment. It was widely respected. Famous writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman went through the rest cure herself and later wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, a chilling story about a woman driven mad by her forced silence. Spoiler: It wasn't the wallpaper that broke her. It was the cage of polite, padded neglect. And then there were the asylums. If your anxiety didn't respond to milk and mandatory napping, you might find yourself behind the stone walls of a sanatorium. Once inside, women were subjected to ice baths, electrotherapy, and endless observation. Some were given morphine, others were restrained for days at a time, their crime being crying too much, talking too fast, refusing to smile. And still, no one asked why. No one asked if she'd lost a child, or endured violence, or simply cracked under the weight of perfection. In the Victorian world, women were supposed to be calm, composed, angelic, and if they weren't, they were hidden away, beautifully, quietly, tragically, because society wasn't built to treat anxious women. It was built to keep them from disrupting the dinner table. Welcome to the early 1900s, where corsets were loosening, the industrial age was humming, and a man named Sigmund Freud had taken up the peculiar hobby of blaming almost everything on your childhood or your father. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, offered a revolutionary idea. Maybe women weren't suffering from demons or defective wombs. Maybe it was their minds, their unconscious, their repressed desires, their unresolved issues. Now, that should have been a turning point, a moment of progress, and in a way it was. Instead of dunking anxious women in cold water or feeding them opium, doctors now invited them to lie on a couch and talk. Revolutionary, right? But before we uncork the champagne, let's talk about how they were expected to talk. To back out halfway through the process brought immense shame, not only to the individual but also to their entire family. In Tahiti, tattoos served as a visual record of genealogy and social status. They might signify divine protection, a spiritual connection, or even sexual maturity. A woman's fingers might be inked to signal her readiness for marriage, while a man's chest might tell the story of his warrior lineage. Every dot, every line, every curve held sacred meaning. Even today, in many Polynesian communities, tattoos retain this powerful and significant role. They're not simply expressions of individuality. They're connections to ancestry, living records carried on the skin, a living, breathing scroll. When Europeans first arrived in the Pacific during the 18th century, they were simultaneously fascinated and horrified by what they witnessed. Sailors, like Captain Cook, documented the practice in their journals. Soon after, his crew members began adopting tattoos themselves, not to honor the ritualistic significance, but to mark their travels a souvenir, a fleeting trend, completely stripped of its original meaning, but inked all the same. Still, the origin remained deeply rooted. Polynesian tattooing was never intended to be casual or frivolous. It was sacred, intensely personal, and carried with immense pride through generations, a testament that one story was worthy of enduring pain and permanent enough to live just beneath the surface of the skin. As we shift eastward, the story of tattooing takes on a more complex and multifaceted shape, one encompassing beauty and punishment, honor and shame, all intricately inked into human flesh. In ancient China, tattoos carried a significant stigma. Rather than being symbols of spirituality or strength, they were often used as marks of disgrace. No longer relegated to dingy backroom shops with flickering neon signs, many transformed into sanctuaries of self-expression. Clean, curated spaces that often resembled art galleries more than the gritty dens of the past. Tattoo artists themselves became celebrities in their own right, boasting extensive portfolios, lengthy wait lists, and dedicated fans who would fly across continents just to sit in their chair. Tattoo styles exploded in diversity. Watercolor tattoos, fine-line minimalism, realism so sharp it resembled photographs, sacred geometry, cultural revivals, portraits of beloved pets and family members, even entire life stories inked from spine to spine. Technological advancements also played a significant role. Machines became quieter and more precise, needles became finer, inks became safer, and healing times shortened. But beneath all the aesthetic enhancements, the core reasons for getting tattooed remained largely the same. People still sought ink for the same fundamental purposes: memory, mourning, empowerment, and rebirth. Some tattoos marked significant milestones: a birth, a death, a new beginning. Others covered scars, both visible and hidden, Some individuals tattooed themselves after escaping abusive relationships, reclaiming their bodies and their narratives. Others honored their ancestors. Some inscribed their stories of survival in symbols that they couldn't yet speak aloud. And yes, some people just really liked frogs wearing cowboy hats. There's room for that too. Across the globe, indigenous tattoo practices began to resurface with renewed pride. Maori tamoko, Inuit skin stitching, Filipino batik, ancient art forms that had once been shamed or outlawed were being revitalized by new generations, reconnecting with their ancestral lineage through intricate line work. Yet, debates persist regarding cultural appropriation, over-commercialization, and whether something sacred can truly survive when it transforms into a trend. Gemini also introduced the techniques that would make the Apollo mission possible: orbital rendezvous and docking, which were needed for the lunar mission. The program's ultimate goal was to prepare astronauts to operate in deep space, even if it meant spending days in orbit, performing complex maneuvers and testing the endurance required for longer missions. By the time Gemini 12 completed its final mission in November 1966, the groundwork had been laid. America was ready for the moon, and the Soviet Union, though still ahead in some respects, had little to show for its efforts in comparison. The United States was gearing up for its grandest challenge yet, a challenge that would not just test technology, but human spirit. The race to the moon was heating up, and the finish line was within reach. The year was 1961. President John F. Kennedy, inspired by the growing tension of the Cold War and the challenge of space, made a bold proclamation that would set the stage for one of humanity's greatest feats. On May 25th, he stood before a joint session of Congress and declared that the United States would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The stakes were now clear. It was no longer just about sending humans into space. It was about reaching the moon and bringing them back. This vision led to the birth of Apollo, NASA's program designed specifically for lunar exploration. The goal was unprecedented: to send astronauts to the moon, land them safely, and return them to Earth. The Apollo program was America's full-throttle response to the Soviet Union's achievements, an answer to their dominance in the space race. The first step was Apollo 1, a mission tragically marred by a fire on January 27, 1967, that claimed the lives of astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee during a pre-launch test. The fire was a devastating setback, but it also spurred an overhaul of NASA's safety protocols and equipment. The labyrinth may have served as a temple complex dedicated to the worship of multiple gods, with the Egyptian pantheon of deities playing central roles in its design. The Egyptians were a deeply religious people, and their monuments often carried spiritual meaning, with each structure symbolizing different aspects of the afterlife, cosmic order, and the journey of the soul. One compelling theory is that the labyrinth was a representation of the afterlife itself. In ancient Egyptian belief, the journey to the afterlife was complex and treacherous. The soul of the deceased had to navigate the many challenges and obstacles that stood between it and the divine realm. The labyrinth, with its maze-like structure and hidden chambers, may have symbolized the trials and tribulations the soul had to endure in the afterlife. Just as the deceased had to find their way through the winding passages of the labyrinth, they also had to navigate the journey through the underworld, guided by the gods and their faith. The labyrinth could also have been a ritualistic space where priests and initiates underwent spiritual tests and trials. Some speculate that it was the site of ancient Egyptian mystery schools where sacred knowledge was imparted to chosen individuals. The initiates might have been led through the labyrinth in a carefully constructed ritual meant to mirror their journey of spiritual enlightenment. The idea of a physical labyrinth representing the journey of the soul is a powerful one, as it would provide a direct connection between the physical world and the spiritual one, linking the ancient Egyptians' understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Another theory holds that the labyrinth was connected to astronomical alignments. The ancient Egyptians were keenly aware of the stars and celestial movements, which guided their agricultural calendar and religious practices. If these texts or symbols were preserved inside the labyrinth, they could offer a glimpse into Egypt's religious practices, revealing aspects of their civilization that have been hidden by time. The labyrinth might also give us new clues about how the ancient Egyptians viewed the cosmos and understood the heavens, which played such a big role in their culture. Many believe that the labyrinth's design wasn't just an architectural wonder, but also a reflection of astronomical alignments or cosmological ideas, linking the physical space to the divine. Plus, finding the labyrinth could change our understanding of ancient Egyptian architecture. Its sheer size and complexity, as described by Herodotus, suggest it was built with advanced engineering techniques that might have influenced later architectural marvels. Archaeologists are especially interested in how the labyrinth might have influenced the design of other monumental structures like the pyramids and the temples that were scattered across Egypt's landscape. But the implications go beyond just religion or architecture. The labyrinth could also tell us more about the social and political structure of Egypt. Was it built by the will of a single pharaoh, or was it a team effort involving many different workers and craftsmen? What does its construction tell us about the organization of ancient Egyptian society? Discovering the labyrinth wouldn't just add a chapter to Egyptology. It would rewrite parts of it, bringing new revelations about the ancient Egyptian civilization and its place in world history. For now, the labyrinth remains hidden, a shadow beneath the sands. But with every new piece of evidence found, the possibility of finding it grows closer. The mysteries of the ancient world are still waiting to be unlocked, and the lost labyrinth may one day emerge from the shadows to reveal its secrets. The lost labyrinth of Egypt has long been seen as more than just a physical structure. Freud and his followers often viewed anxiety in women as the result of repressed sexual desire or internalized guilt, usually directed at their parents. If you were anxious, it was likely because you were suppressing something scandalous. You just didn't know it yet. Were you afraid to leave the house? Clearly symbolic. Having recurring nightmares? Probably a metaphor for your mother. Panic attacks? Definitely something Freudian, probably phallic. And while this new method of treatment was less physically violent, it still came with its own subtle form of blame. The problem was inside you, not your circumstances, not the trauma, not the stifling expectations placed on your shoulders. You just needed to unpack it. And if you didn't get better, maybe you weren't trying hard enough. Maybe you were resisting the truth. Psychoanalysis spread like wildfire among the intellectual elite. In smoky Viennese rooms, doctors scribbled notes while women whispered about their dreams and fears, still trying to be taken seriously, still trying to be heard. It was progress, yes, but fragile progress. Because even though the cages had been traded for couches, women's anxiety was still being interpreted through a male lens, often reduced to libido, longing, or lingering daddy issues. And so the question remained, could a woman ever simply be anxious without being seen as broken? Or would every tremble, every tear, every silent scream be pinned to a theory instead of a truth? It's the 1950s now. The war is over, the lawn is trimmed, and your casserole is expected to be on the table by 6 p.m. You're a woman in suburbia. Polished nails, bright smile, pearls around your neck, and your anxiety? Well, darling, that's not something we talk about. Because, according to glossy magazines and daytime radio, everything is fine. So why do you feel like screaming? Criminals were tattooed on the face or neck with words like thief or traitor, serving as permanent reminders to society of their transgressions and the people they could never escape being. This practice was known as cheesha, or branding for exile. The punishment didn't end with the sentence. It remained visibly etched on the skin for the remainder of their lives. And yet, even here, within the shadows of shame, tattooing possessed deeper layers of meaning. Some Chinese warriors voluntarily wore ink to demonstrate their unwavering loyalty to their brothers in arms or their deep devotion to a particular cause. In the legendary novel Water Margin, one of the 108 heroic outlaws is said to have an entire body elaborately tattooed with images of dragons, tigers, and flames, a man's honor inscribed on his skin like sacred scripture. In Japan, the story is equally layered, perhaps even more so. Early Japanese tattoos, called irizumi, were used to ward off evil spirits, protect fishermen from the dangers of the sea, or even symbolize social status. However, as in China, tattoos also became tools of punishment. Criminals were marked with lines on their arms or specific symbols on their foreheads. In certain regions, each subsequent crime resulted in an additional stroke, a visible tally of dishonor for all to see. But over time, something began to shift. By the Edo period, 1600s to 1800s, full-body tattoos began to emerge as a thriving underground art form. Vibrant, elaborate designs featuring dragons, koi fish, gods, and demons began to stretch across the backs, arms, and legs of commoners. These weren't criminals. They were firemen, laborers, and gamblers, individuals with dangerous occupations and even more dangerous reputations. Then came the Yakuza, Japan's feared crime syndicates, who embraced full-body irezumi as potent symbols of strength, unwavering loyalty, and intimidation. But perhaps that's precisely where the enduring beauty of tattoos lies. They are constantly evolving, reflecting the ever-changing tapestry of human experience. They are a personal, permanent reminder that stories, like skin, are meant to be marked, honored, and carried with pride. Tattoos have always existed in a place of tension, a balance between pain and pride, permanence and what is fleeting, who we currently are and who we aspire to become. So we arrive back at our starting point, ink embedded into skin. It's a story told without the need for spoken words, a mark made not for the approval of others, but for the sake of truth. And in the quiet, ancient language of tattooing, that has always been sufficient. The Apollo program pressed on with new determination and innovation, learning from the loss of those brave men. In 1968, Apollo 8 became the first mission to send astronauts into lunar orbit. As the crew, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders, circled the moon, they became the first humans to see the far side of the moon with their own eyes. The sight of Earth rising above the lunar surface from the spacecraft's window was an image that captured the world's imagination and marked a milestone in human exploration. But the ultimate goal still lay ahead. The world watched as NASA prepared for Apollo 11, the mission that would make Kennedy's dream a reality. Tensions between the US and USSR were palpable, but the United States was determined to reach the moon first. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history. As Armstrong descended from the lunar module and stepped onto the surface of the moon, he famously declared, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The United States had done it. The moon was no longer just a point in the sky. It was a place where humans had stood, a new world conquered. The space race had been won, but humanity's journey beyond Earth was just beginning. On July 20th, 1969, America had done the unthinkable. It had landed a man on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission had fulfilled President Kennedy's promise, and Neil Armstrong's first step onto the lunar surface resonated as both a national victory and a global triumph for humanity. However, the space race wasn't over. After the glory of Apollo 11, the question now became, what comes next? For NASA, the immediate task was to complete the Apollo program. With 5 more successful moon landings between 1969 and 1972, astronauts explored different parts of the lunar surface, conducting experiments and collecting rock samples that would offer clues to the moon's history. The labyrinth could have been built in alignment with the stars, with its passages and chambers reflecting the patterns of the night sky, perhaps mirroring the path of the sun or the journey of the soul through the stars. Whatever its true purpose, the lost labyrinth remains an enigma. Its symbolism, its mysteries, and its profound connection to the ancient Egyptian worldview continue to captivate those who seek to uncover the secrets buried beneath the sands. For centuries, the lost labyrinth of Egypt has remained a mystery, buried beneath the shifting sands of time. But the fascination with this incredible structure has not waned. Archaeologists, historians, and explorers continue to search for the labyrinth, hoping that modern technology and renewed curiosity might finally reveal the secrets hidden beneath Egypt's vast desert. The search for the labyrinth has been a long and difficult one. Early explorers and archaeologists, using the limited tools of their time, sought in vain for the legendary site. In the 19th century, European expeditions ventured into the desert, particularly around the Fayum Oasis and Lake Moeris, which Herodotus had indicated as the labyrinth's possible location. However, these early searches turned up little beyond scattered ruins and unclear remnants, enough to spark interest, but not enough to make any definitive discoveries. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the search for the labyrinth has gained new momentum thanks to advancements in technology. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and modern excavation methods have provided fresh tools in the search for the lost wonder. With the help of aerial surveys and satellite imaging, researchers have been able to scan vast stretches of the desert where the labyrinth is thought to lie. Some scholars believe that beneath the sands there may still be hidden remains of massive stone structures, echoes of the great labyrinth Herodotus described. Its symbolic importance, woven into Egyptian culture, has echoed through history, influencing not only the myths of ancient Egypt, but also the stories of later civilizations. Even in its absence, the idea of the labyrinth has continued to capture our imaginations. In ancient Egypt, labyrinths weren't just architectural marvels. They were symbolic representations of the soul's journey. The maze-like structure might have been designed to mirror the difficult path the dead had to travel to reach the afterlife. In Egyptian cosmology, the afterlife was full of challenges and mysteries, where only the worthy could pass through the gates to eternal life. The labyrinth, with its many twists and turns, might have symbolized the soul's journey through these trials. The labyrinth's role in Egyptian culture was possibly linked to the worship of Sobuk, the crocodile god, whose temples were often located in the Fayum region. Sobuk was believed to be both a creator and a destroyer, a duality reflected in the labyrinth's ability to both guide and confuse. The symbolism of a hidden, mysterious maze with its guarded secrets might have represented the dual nature of the divine, both nurturing and terrifying. But the influence of the labyrinth didn't end with Egypt. As centuries passed, the idea of the labyrinth spread across cultures and myths. The most famous of these myths is the story of the Labyrinth of Crete, designed by the legendary craftsman Daedalus. In Greek mythology, the labyrinth was built to house the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature. Unlike the Egyptian version, this labyrinth was associated with confusion and entrapment, a place where only those lost within its walls would face destruction. Over time, the concept of the labyrinth evolved, taking on different meanings across cultures. In medieval Europe, it became a symbol of the spiritual journey, often shown in the floors of cathedrals as a path of prayer and meditation. Enter Mother's Little Helper, the nickname for a small pill with a big promise. Calmness, specifically Valium, and its earlier cousin, Miltown. These little sedatives were marketed directly to women, especially housewives, who felt overwhelmed, underappreciated, or quietly unraveling in a sea of matching Tupperware. Feeling sad, anxious, numb? Just pop a pill, dear, and smile for the neighbors. Doctors handed them out like candy. No one asked about trauma. No one asked about loneliness. No one wondered if spending every day vacuuming in heels while pretending everything was perfect might be crushing. Because in this new world of conformity and consumerism, a woman's role was to be content. And if she wasn't, clearly something was wrong with her. Not the role, not the expectations, not the endless isolation. Pharmaceutical companies leaned into this narrative with disturbing enthusiasm. One ad for tranquilizers featured a woman gripping the sink with the caption, "You can't set her free, but you can help her feel less trapped." Another proudly promised peace of mind for overburdened housewives. You know, the ones holding the family together with a smile and a rising dose of benzodiazepines. By the 1960s, millions of women were medicated, not because they were mentally ill, but because they were exhausted, because they were sad and didn't know why, because they were human in a culture that didn't allow them to be. And while these drugs offered short-term relief, they often came with long-term dependency. But no one talked about that. Addiction, after all, was considered unladylike. So they smiled, they swallowed, and somewhere deep beneath the sedation, the real question lingered. What if her anxiety wasn't a disorder? What if it was a warning? A silent scream from a soul that was never allowed to speak. By the 1970s, something had shifted. The more coverage, the more respect commanded, and the more pain willingly endured. These tattoos weren't intended for public display. They were private, hidden beneath suits, and revealed only in bathhouses or during battle. In both China and Japan, tattoos existed in a constant state of tension, simultaneously representing art and punishment, identity and exile, a perpetual dance between pride and shame. Because sometimes the very ink that marks you also ultimately defines you. In ancient Europe, Tattoos walked a fine line between expressions of power and instruments of punishment, depending entirely on who wielded the needle and who bore the mark. Each mission reinforced the U.S. position as the undisputed leader in space exploration. But while Apollo was successful, it came at an immense cost, both financially and in terms of human lives. The program had consumed resources and attention, and by the early 1970s, political support for further lunar missions began to wane. The Cold War was still intensifying, but the urgency to outdo the Soviet Union in space was fading. As a result, the Apollo program was abruptly cut short after Apollo 17 in 1972. The immediate focus of space exploration shifted. The Skylab program, launched in 1973, was America's first space station where astronauts lived and worked for extended periods, conducting experiments in microgravity. Skylab demonstrated the viability of humans living in space for extended periods, laying the groundwork for future space stations and deep space missions. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, despite its initial successes, began to slow its space efforts. Although it had succeeded in sending the first human into space, the USSR never managed to land on the moon. The race was won, but the Soviets continued with unmanned missions to explore Venus and Mars and even launched their own space station program, Salyut, which eventually led to Mir, a massive orbital research station that became a symbol of Soviet scientific ambition in space. But it was the Space Shuttle program that would define the next era of space exploration. Launched in 1981, the shuttle was designed to be reusable, allowing for multiple missions with the same spacecraft. The shuttle era promised greater accessibility to space, enabling regular cargo and crew missions to low Earth orbit and eventually the construction of the International Space Station. Despite the promise of these new frontiers, the early shuttle flights were fraught with challenges, and the tragic loss of Challenger in 1986 reminded the world of the risks involved. One of the key locations consistently linked to the labyrinth is the area around Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis, near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis. It was here, according to Herodotus and other ancient sources, that the labyrinth was constructed. The Fayum region was a fertile oasis, and the area's importance in Egyptian civilization makes it a promising candidate for housing the labyrinth. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered traces of ancient stone foundations and architectural remnants in this area, though they have yet to find definitive evidence of the labyrinth itself. In recent decades, there have been occasional reports of underwater ruins discovered in the area around Lake Moeris, sparking renewed interest in the site. Some experts believe that parts of the labyrinth may lie submerged beneath the lake, hidden by thousands of years of sediment and water. Others speculate that the labyrinth could be buried under a sand dune near the remnants of ancient Egyptian cities or temples. Despite these advancements, the labyrinth's discovery remains elusive, but the search is far from over. Each new excavation, every new scan of the desert, brings with it a glimmer of hope that one day the lost labyrinth may emerge once again, offering up its secrets to the modern world. The sands of Egypt may hold more than just a forgotten building. They may hold the keys to understanding the deep spiritual and architectural ingenuity of one of history's most remarkable civilizations. The search for the lost labyrinth is not just an archaeological quest. It's an attempt to uncover a hidden chapter of Egypt's history, a chapter that could dramatically alter our understanding of the ancient world. If the labyrinth is ever found, it would provide unprecedented insights into the architecture, religion, and daily life of one of the most advanced civilizations in history. Pilgrims would walk the labyrinth's intricate paths as a symbol of their own journey towards salvation. The idea of the labyrinth as a sacred space, one that requires both wisdom and courage to navigate, went beyond borders and cultures, connecting it to the human experience of seeking answers, truth, and enlightenment. The labyrinth's connection to life and death, as well as its association with spiritual trials, ensures its place as a symbol that transcends time. Whether in Egypt, Greece, or later religious traditions, it has remained a powerful metaphor for the complexities of the human soul and its struggle to find meaning and purpose. Although the lost labyrinth of Egypt remains hidden beneath the sands, its symbolic legacy continues to inspire us and provoke thought. It reminds us that some mysteries, though buried, are timeless, waiting to be uncovered when the world is ready to understand their deeper meanings. The search for the lost labyrinth is far from over, and each year, new technologies and methods bring us closer to uncovering its hidden secrets. Though it has been elusive for centuries, the labyrinth continues to capture the imaginations of archaeologists and explorers, drawing attention to the mystery of this ancient wonder and the possibility of unlocking one of Egypt's greatest lost sites. The region around Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis remains the main focus of digs. Many believe that the labyrinth lies buried somewhere near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, a once thriving center that was home to a temple dedicated to Sobuk, the crocodile god. This location is key to theories placing the labyrinth in the Fayum, since Herodotus himself connected the two in his writings. In recent decades, advanced technology has breathed new life into the search. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, GPR, have allowed researchers to explore previously inaccessible or unknown areas, giving us new clues about what might lie beneath the surface. The casserole was still warm, the house still tidy, but now, the woman inside it had questions like, why am I the only one sedated? Why does my pain come with a prescription but not a conversation? And who decided that anxiety was something I should apologize for? The feminist movement was swelling, not with rage, but with clarity. Women were beginning to talk in consciousness-raising groups across living rooms and campuses. They compared notes, and what they discovered was they weren't alone. Anxiety, they realized, wasn't some personal flaw. It wasn't just hormones or hysteria. It was often the logical result of being overworked, unheard, and expected to perform emotional labor like it was part of the furniture. Books like The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan cracked the polished surface of post-war domesticity, revealing the problem that has no name. It described women who felt empty, anxious, restless, despite having everything society told them they should want. Finally, someone said it, it's not in your head. It's in the walls, the expectations, the silence. And once the silence broke, there was no going back. Women began reclaiming their stories. They stopped accepting tranquilizers as apologies. They started questioning the institutions that had pathologized their emotions for centuries. In therapy rooms, a new kind of counselor was emerging, one who actually listened, one who didn't assume every panic attack was a cry for marriage or motherhood. Women entered psychology, medicine, and psychiatry, not just as patients, but as professionals. It wasn't perfect. Misdiagnosis was still common, bias still lingered, and pharmaceutical companies were still very busy. But something important had changed. Women were talking, and this time they weren't being interrupted. They were connecting the dots between personal pain and societal pressure, between internal struggle and external structure. They were rewriting the narrative from, what's wrong with me? But space exploration continued, driven by a shared desire to learn, to grow, and to push the boundaries of what was possible. The era of government space agencies defined by the space race and Cold War competition began to give way to a new age, one that increasingly saw the involvement of private companies and international collaboration. One of the most tantalizing aspects of the labyrinth is the possibility that it holds ancient Egyptian knowledge that has been lost for millennia. The labyrinth, with its intricate corridors, chambers, and symbolic carvings, could be a repository of sacred texts or ritualistic knowledge. Some scholars speculate that it could contain documents that explain the deeper spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians, possibly shedding light on the mysteries of the afterlife, the gods they worshipped, and the rituals they performed to ensure the passage of the soul to the next world. If these texts or symbols were preserved within the labyrinth, they could offer a glimpse into Egypt's religious practices and rituals, revealing aspects of their civilization that have been obscured by time. The labyrinth might also offer new clues about how the ancient Egyptians viewed the cosmos and their understanding of the heavens, which played such a central role in their culture. Many believe that the labyrinth's design was not just an architectural wonder, but also a reflection of astronomical alignments or cosmological concepts, tying the physical space to the divine. Moreover, the labyrinth's discovery could also revolutionize our understanding of ancient Egyptian architecture. The sheer size and complexity of the structure, as described by Herodotus, suggests that it was built with advanced engineering techniques that might have influenced later architectural marvels. Archaeologists are particularly interested in how the labyrinth may have influenced the design of other monumental structures like the pyramids and the temples that dotted Egypt's landscape. But the implications go beyond just religious or architectural history. The labyrinth could also tell us more about the social and political structure of Egypt. Was it built by the will of a single pharaoh? Or was it a collaborative effort that involved many different workers and craftsmen? These technologies have enabled archaeologists to detect signs of hidden structures, even those buried beneath thick layers of sand. In 2008, a team of researchers from Belgium and Egypt used satellite images to identify what they thought were the possible outlines of the labyrinth near Hawara, close to the Fayum oasis. While these findings caused excitement, they haven't yet been confirmed by on-site digging. However, in 2017, an aerial survey of the Fayum oasis revealed anomalies in the terrain, large, rectangular formations that could suggest the presence of ruins or ancient walls, possibly marking the labyrinth's location. Despite these promising discoveries, much of the labyrinth remains hidden, and the desert's shifting sands continue to hide the full extent of what might be buried beneath them. Some believe that part of the labyrinth could be submerged beneath Lake Moeris, which has changed shape over the millennia. The idea that parts of the labyrinth could lie beneath the water's surface offers new hope to those who believe it is still out there, waiting to be rediscovered. New investigative avenues are constantly opening up as technology advances, bringing humanity closer to one of the most impressive and fascinating sights in the world. To what happened to me? And slowly, painfully, the world began to shift. Because when women stopped whispering and started comparing notes, they discovered something revolutionary. That their anxiety wasn't madness. It was truth trying to find a voice in a world that never wanted to hear it. As the 1980s and 90s rolled in, women's anxiety finally got a proper name. Not hysteria, not nerves, not she's just tired, but actual diagnostic terms: generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD. Finally, a medical vocabulary that didn't blame the womb. Progress, right? Well, sort of. Psychiatry was getting more precise. The DSM, the big diagnostic manual with all the mental health labels, was growing thicker, and insurance companies were starting to reimburse treatments. But even as the science evolved, the experience of being a woman with anxiety still came with familiar echoes of doubt, dismissal, and stigma. Let's say you were a woman in 1993 having panic attacks. You go to a doctor, heart pounding, palms sweating, afraid you're dying. He might hand you a pamphlet, a prescription for Xanax, and a polite suggestion to get some rest. At least they'd stopped blaming your uterus. Now they were blaming your lifestyle. You're working too hard. You're probably just overwhelmed. Have you tried jogging? And sure, therapy was now a real option if you could afford it. But finding a therapist who wouldn't assume your anxiety was just being emotional could still be a challenge. If you cried in the session, you were labeled fragile. If you didn't, maybe you were in denial. Either way, your diagnosis came with an asterisk. What does its construction say about the organization of ancient Egyptian society? The discovery of the labyrinth would not just add a chapter to Egyptology. It would rewrite parts of it, bringing new revelations about the ancient Egyptian civilization and its place in the history of the world. For now, the labyrinth remains hidden, a shadow beneath the sands. But with every new piece of evidence uncovered, the possibility of finding it grows closer. The mysteries of the ancient world are still waiting to be unlocked, and the lost labyrinth may one day emerge from the shadows to reveal its secrets. The lost labyrinth of Egypt has long been seen as more than just a physical structure. Its symbolic significance, woven into the fabric of Egyptian culture, has echoed through history, influencing not only the myths of ancient Egypt, but also the narratives of later civilizations. Even in its absence, the idea of the labyrinth has continued to captivate the human imagination. In ancient Egypt, labyrinths were not just architectural marvels. They were symbolic representations of the journey of the soul. The maze-like structure of the labyrinth may have been designed to mirror the difficult path the deceased had to navigate to reach the afterlife. In Egyptian cosmology, the afterlife was a realm full of challenges, trials, and mysteries, where only the worthy would pass through the gates to eternal life. The labyrinth, with its many twists and turns, might have served as a metaphor for the soul's journey through these trials. The labyrinth's role in Egyptian culture was perhaps linked to the worship of Sobek, the crocodile god, whose temples were often placed in the Fayum region. Sobek was believed to be both a creator and a destroyer, a duality reflected in the labyrinth's ability to both guide and confound. The symbolism of a hidden, mysterious maze, with its guarded secrets, might have represented the dual nature of the divine, both nurturing and terrifying. But the influence of the labyrinth did not end with Egypt. As the centuries passed, the idea of the labyrinth spread across cultures and myths. The most famous of these myths is the story of the Labyrinth of Crete, designed by the legendary craftsman Daedalus. In Greek mythology, the labyrinth was built to house the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature. This labyrinth, unlike the Egyptian version, was associated with confusion and entrapment, a place where only those lost within its walls could face destruction. Over time, the concept of the labyrinth evolved, taking on different meanings across cultures. In medieval Europe, the labyrinth became a symbol of the spiritual journey, often depicted in the floors of cathedrals as a path of prayer and meditation. Pilgrims would walk the labyrinth's intricate paths as a symbol of their own journey towards salvation. The idea of the labyrinth as a sacred space, a space that requires both wisdom and courage to navigate, transcended borders and cultures, connecting it to the broader human experience of seeking answers, truth, and enlightenment. The labyrinth's connection to both life and death, as well as its association with spiritual trials, ensures its place as a symbol that transcends time. Whether it was in Egypt, Greece, or later religious traditions, the labyrinth has remained a powerful metaphor for the complexities of the human soul and its struggle to find meaning and purpose. Though the lost labyrinth of Egypt remains hidden beneath the sands, its symbolic legacy continues to inspire and provoke thought. It reminds us that some mysteries, though buried, are timeless, waiting to be uncovered when the world is ready to understand their deeper meanings. The search for the lost labyrinth of Egypt is far from over, and with each passing year, new technologies and methods bring us closer to uncovering its hidden secrets. Though it has remained elusive for centuries, the labyrinth continues to captivate the imaginations of archaeologists and explorers alike, drawing attention to the mystery of this ancient wonder and the possibility of unlocking one of the greatest lost sites of Egypt. The region surrounding Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis continues to be the primary focus of excavations. Many believe that the labyrinth lies buried somewhere near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, a once thriving hub that was home to a temple dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile god. This location is central to the theories that place the labyrinth in the Fayum, as Herodotus himself made connections between the two in his writings. In recent decades, advanced technology has breathed new life into the search. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, GPR, have allowed researchers to explore areas previously inaccessible or unknown, providing new clues about what might lie beneath the surface. These technologies have enabled archaeologists to detect signs of hidden structures, even those that might be buried beneath thick layers of sand. In 2008, a team of researchers from Belgium and Egypt, using satellite imagery, identified what they believed to be the possible outlines of the labyrinth near Hawara, close to the Fayum Oasis. While these findings generated excitement, they have yet to be confirmed through on-site excavation. However, in 2017, an aerial survey conducted over the Fayum Oasis revealed anomalies in the terrain. Large, rectangular formations that could suggest the presence of ruins or ancient walls, potentially marking the labyrinth's location. Despite these promising discoveries, much of the labyrinth remains hidden, and the desert's shifting sands continue to obscure the full extent of what might be buried beneath them. Some believe that part of the labyrinth could be submerged beneath Lake Moeris, which has changed shape over the millennia. The idea that parts of the labyrinth could lie beneath the water's surface offers new hope for those who believe it is still out there, waiting to be rediscovered. New investigative avenues constantly arise as the scope of technology expands, bringing humanity closer and closer to one of the most impressive, fascinating sights in the world.